Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on funding for crime victim services, hosted by the National Congress of American Indians and the Tribal Law and Policy Institute. I want to thank you all for joining us. My name is Esther Labrado, and I'm an enrolled citizen of the North Fork Rancheria of Mono Indians and a descendant of the Morongo Band of Mission Indians, and I'm a project attorney at the National Congress of American Indians. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on funding for crime victim services, hosted by the National Congress of American Indians and the Tribal Law and Policy Institute. I want to thank you all for joining us today. My name is Esther Labrado, and I'm an enrolled citizen of the North Fork Rancheria of Mono Indians and a descendant of the Morongo Band of Mission Indians, and I'm a project attorney at NCAI. Before we get started on today's webinar, I'll go over a couple housekeeping items and let you all know how you can participate in today's webinar. So this is the GoToWebinar attendee view. On the left is the viewer window, which will show the presentation, and on the right side is the control panel. And don't worry if you can't see the control panel right now. Sometimes it minimizes itself, and I'm going to walk through how you can open it and go ahead and navigate. So by clicking the orange arrow, you can open and close your control panel. So if you don't see the control panel, it might look like this. There's a small orange arrow on the right side of your screen. Click on it and it will open your control panel. And here's where you'll see the information about your audio connection. We encourage everyone to go ahead and use telephone mode. So call in on your phone. It helps limit feedback and overall improve quality. And once you do click on Use Telephone, you'll see the dial-in information. It'll have the phone number, the access code, and your unique audio PIN. All attendees are currently muted, but please feel free to submit all of your questions in the question box. Also in the control panel, we'll be monitoring it throughout the webinar, but questions will be saved until the end. We anticipate leaving a significant amount of time for Q&A to make sure we can answer everyone's questions today. The webinar today is being recorded, and you will receive an email with a link to the recording, and it'll be posted online as well. So again, I just want to thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. Today's webinar's goal is to explain how tribal governments can access new formula funding to support crime victim services. And we're focusing specifically on the April 30th mandatory pre-application deadline. And again, the primary goal is to really make sure we're answering any questions from potential applicants. Today's presenters are Virginia Davis, Senior Advisor at the National Congress of American Indians, Jerry Gardner, Executive Director at the Tribal Law and Policy Institute, and Brecht Donahue, Acting Deputy Director at the U.S. Department of Justice Office for Victims of Crime. And with that, I'll turn it over to Virginia. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Esther. And good afternoon, everybody, or good morning to those of you on the West Coast. As Esther said, our main goal today is to talk to you all a little bit about a current funding opportunity that's available for all federally recognized Indian tribes from the Office for Victims of Crime at the U.S. Department of Justice. We've been talking about this tribal set-aside funding for a few years now. I'm sure most of you, if you made your way to this webinar, are familiar with it. But starting a couple of years ago, Congress started making a tribal set-aside available from the Federal Crime Victims Fund. And the result has been over $100 million for the last 3 years, specifically to support tribal crime victims programs. This year, about $118 million will be distributed via a formula to all eligible tribes. That's the first time that's happening. The past 2 years of funding have been distributed as competitive discretionary grants, and tribal governments, through consultation with DOJ, urged the department to adopt a formula to distribute the funding more equitably among all of the tribes. And so DOJ is doing that this year. And so That change to a formula grant program means that the process is a little bit different this year, and that's why we wanted to have this webinar to talk that through, make sure everybody was aware of the opportunity, and also to give you all a chance to ask questions. We're really grateful to Brecht from OVC for joining us for that purpose. As I said, OVC is administering the program. What we expect, it's the first time they're doing this formula, but the way it'll work is that each Indian tribe who applies will be allocated a base amount. So we don't know yet what the base amount is because we don't know how many tribes are going to apply, but each tribe will get a base amount, and then additional funds will be distributed over the base on the basis of population in one of 8 population tiers. So that all sounds a little bit complicated, but what it means is that each tribe is going to get a base amount plus an additional amount based on their relative population. So you can see here at the bottom of this slide a link to the solicitation that explains all of the details about the funding opportunity. If you go over to your control panel, you'll also see under the Handouts tab that there's a PDF document that is also is the solicitation. So you can either click on the link or go get it from the handouts. We wanted to flag that the solicitation was actually revised after it was released. So you want to make sure that you're using the most recent version, which is the one that says revised April 16th, 2020. The reasons for the revision, we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through the slides. But, you know, obviously when DOJ was planning for this grant program this year, none of us had any idea what the circumstances would be and that we'd be dealing with this really incredibly disruptive public health emergency. And so DOJ made some changes to the solicitation to try and give more flexibility and try and help make sure that all of the tribes who are interested in receiving this funding are able to do so, and to try and, yeah, like I said, just provide some more flexibility for how the application requirements play out during this time when we know that many tribes are very distracted with other pressing matters. Many have, you know, staff who are on furlough or working from home. And so those changes were all intended to try and make this easier for tribes given the changed circumstances. I already mentioned this a bit, but just wanted to stress that this year's solicitation is substantially different from last year's solicitation. If you've applied in the past, it looks really different. That's because it's shifted to a formula distribution at the request of the tribes. The biggest difference is that last year it was just one deadline. There was a date when you had to submit your proposal and your budget, and that was that. But this year, it's a 2-step process with 2 deadlines, and both of those deadlines are mandatory, so we wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that. The first mandatory deadline that OVC is calling the pre-application is due next week on April 30th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The full application will then be due on June 15th, 2020. The pre-application deadline, which is next week, is pretty simple and pretty straightforward, and we're going to talk more about that. But mainly we wanted to just stress for you all that you should really carefully review this year's solicitation requirements since the program has changed since last year. Okay, so I wanted to show you the timeline, the kind of big picture, what we're talking about here. You know, step 1, all the interested tribes are going to submit their pre-application. You're going to do that by next week, April 30th. After you've done that, OVC is going to look at the universe of tribes who have applied and apply their formula to calculate tribal allocations. So what that means is they're going to figure out how much your tribe is eligible to get. And then they will notify your tribe with a specific budget number. So then you will take that specific budget number, you know, maybe OVC is going to tell you, you know what, you get $800,000. You'll then take that allocation that they've given you and develop a final application and a final budget, you know, a proposed budget, how you're going to spend that allocation. And that's what will have to be submitted by June 15th. OVC will then review that and go through their normal process that they do with any federal grant, where they do a budget review, et cetera, with the goal of having your grant agreement finalized by September 30th, which is the end of the fiscal year. And then the idea is that the project period will begin January 1 of next year. So that's the big picture, what the timeline looks like. But what we're really focused on with this webinar is that first step. What do you need to do to submit your pre-application next week? We will do another webinar to help talk through what needs to happen by the June 15th deadline. But for right now, we're very focused on the April 30th deadline since that's coming up next week. Okay, so again, just a big picture overview of what this funding opportunity looks like. We don't know how much each individual tribe is going to get until after we get past step one and OVC has a chance to apply their formula. But we do know that we expect the awards will range between a low of $350,000 and it'll be capped at $3 million. So your tribe would get somewhere in that range depending on who else applies and what population tier your tribe fits into. The amounts will be determined by a formula. Brex, I'm sure, is happy to answer any questions you all may have about how that's going to work. And there's more information in the solicitation on pages 7 to 9. What can you use these funds for? It's the same thing that you've been able to use it for the last couple of years, and that's really a wide range of programs, activities, equipment, supplies, all of, to help support victims, crime victims. There is included in the solicitation Appendix A, which is a really helpful table that shows all the allowable and unallowable costs. And again, you don't really need to focus too much on that until you get to the second step of the application. But it's helpful. It's there if you want to look at it now. Oh, that actually reminds me of something I wanted to say about the solicitation. What everybody's focused on right now is the April 30th deadline, which is next week. But the solicitation lays out everything you need to do both for the April 30th deadline and for the June 15th deadline. So I wanted to flag that for you, that as you're going through the solicitation, a lot of it won't be relevant until after you get your budget allocation back from OVC. So it can be helpful to be aware of it, to skim it now, but you really need to be focused on the requirements for the April 30th deadline, which is what we're going to talk more about in a few slides. The other thing that I wanted to stress that is different than usual, oftentimes when we're looking at a grant funding opportunity, we want to know what is the award period, how long do I have to spend this money? And that will actually be determined by the tribe. So OVC has said that you can have up to a 5-year grant period. And the grant start date will be January 1, 2021. But if you want to build a budget where you spend your full allocation in year 1 or in 3 years, that's up to the tribe. The tribe will determine the grant period up to 5 years. I'm happy to answer questions about that or talk more about it. We expect that this formula funding is not going to be a one-time funding opportunity. We expect that Congress will continue to make this money available, and so you will have an opportunity next year to get a formula allocation again, and the year after that, and the year after that. So how a tribe wants to budget with this first year's worth of money is something for you to think about and to determine based on your individual tribal needs.
Virginia, we have a question from a participant. Someone asked if the tribe already has a set-aside grant, could they utilize those stats and activities for this new grant?
Sorry, could they utilize the what in activities?
The statistics and activities for the new grant.
Yes, so if you have an existing set-aside grant, you are absolutely eligible to apply for this funding too. What you need to be on the lookout for is, you can't pay for one thing twice, right? You can't double dip. So if, let's say your existing grant says you're going to pay an advocate salary for the next 3 years and you're right in the middle of that, you can't say in this new grant that you're going to pay that person's salary for 2021 because you've already got money to pay that person's salary in 2021, if that makes sense. But if your existing grant, that advocate salary is only paid through 2020, you could pick it up with the new grant in 2021. You just don't, you can't duplicate. And you do want to think about how the two grants would fit together, but you're absolutely eligible. Brecht, did you want to clarify or correct anything I said?
No, that was 100% right. Thank you.
Thanks. Chia, was there any follow-up or? Yeah.
Not any follow-up, but one other question. Let's see, I'm going to read it. We put a project period in the pre-application. I'm assuming that we can change the project period once we know how much the formula is.
Yeah, Brecht, I'm going to let you answer that one.
Yeah, the answer is yes. I mean, what we had suggested to people, and as that they put a 1-year project period in for the pre-application. I mean, frankly, if you put in 2 years, it's not the end of the world. That is fine. The reality is that you will have an opportunity to revise the project period once you receive your allocation amount and you are submitting your full application with the program narrative and the budget. You will have an opportunity to go into GMS and change both the award amount, because hopefully you put in $1 like we specified in the solicitation, and you would also change the project period to whatever you want based on the amount of funding that you're receiving.
Okay, so this slide, we're just showing you some resources that you may need. OVC has done 2 pre-application webinars, both of which are available online. And that top bullet is a link to forms that you need to apply. You can also find those in the solicitation. Okay, just really quickly to talk about eligibility. There are actually 3 categories of eligible applicants: federally recognized Indian tribal governments, authorized designees of a federally recognized Indian tribe. What that means is if your tribe wants to designate a local nonprofit or some other entity to apply on your behalf, that's your sovereign right to do that. So you could designate someone to apply on your behalf, or a tribal consortia which would be a group of tribes who choose to apply together. For the federally recognized Indian tribes, the other eligibility requirements we want to flag is that each tribe can submit only 1 application. And then also, and we already went over this in response to the question that was asked, your request for funding needs to be different from any activity and expenses that are currently being funded. No double dipping. Okay, next slide. And when we're talking about the eligibility requirements for the other 2 categories of applicants, so the designees or the tribal consortia, they have the same first 2 requirements, and then they also need to submit something that demonstrates that they're actually authorized as a legal matter to apply on the tribe's behalf. So that 3rd requirement about a tribal authorizing resolution or some other kind of evidence of legal authority only applies to designees or to tribal consortia. Federally recognized tribes do not have to submit an authorizing resolution. That's only designees or tribal consortia. And there's a lot of information about the specifics on that in the solicitation. I'd encourage you to look at that if you're a designee or consortia applicant. Okay, pre-application requirements. It's really straightforward. It's due next week. And there are only 3 things you need to submit: a population certification form. And the reason for that, you have to tell OVC they need to figure out what the population of the tribes that are applying looks like so that they can run their formula. And then 2, a pretty standard financial management and system of internal controls questionnaire that goes with all federal grants. And then the SF424, which is a standard form for applying for federal funds as well. So really the main substantive piece of that is the population certification form. Again, if you're a designee in tribal consortia, you'll have a 4th piece, which is a tribal resolution or something else showing your authority to apply on behalf of the tribe. If you're not able to get that by next week, OVC has figured out a way to be flexible on that given the current circumstances with the pandemic, and there's information about that in the solicitation. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit in more detail about the population certification. Big picture, each applicant needs to submit a population certification. you're going to certify to three things. The population number, kind of what's the number you're using, what tier you fit in, and we'll talk about tiers in a minute, and then what your basis was for coming up with that. So that could be something like, we checked with the tribal enrollment office and our membership is X, plus we know from the census that we have this many non-Indians who live on the reservation who we also provide services to, et cetera. Whatever you use to come up with the population you're certifying. The person who submits the grant application in GMS is going to be your certifying official. And there's it's a fillable PDF form that we're going to show you in a minute. It's on pages 6 and 7 of the solicitation.
Virginia, we just got a question. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
They wanted clarification that the population is from the tribe that is applying, not the population that the grant will serve or assist.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting point that I think is worth, I think this is a major point of confusion for folks. It is up to you to decide what population number you're using. OVC, they say clearly in the solicitation, and they said clearly at consultation and heard pretty clearly from the tribes about this too. They recognize that circumstances differ among tribes and that in some places it'll make sense to use their enrollment number. And in other places, it'll make more sense to talk about a service population, or it may make sense to use some combination of both. So tribes actually have flexibility to determine their methodology themselves. And so one tribe may use their enrollment number and another tribe may use a different number. And I know that's been a point of confusion for folks, but the reason for that is that DOJ was trying to be deferential to tribes, knowing that the tribes are the experts to really figure out what's the relevant number for their program.
Okay, one more question about this. As a federally recognized tribe, can we say per our enrollment office, or do we need to have a letter confirming from our enrollment office?
Nope, you don't need to have a letter. You can say per your enrollment office.
Someone else wanted to know if the Indian Health Service population number would work.
If you think that's the best number for, to capture kind of, then yes. Okay, so tiers. These are the 8 tiers that DOJ has set out. So basically, you'll say what your tribe population is. Let's say your tribe has, 5,632 enrolled members, and that's the number that you want to use for purposes of this grant. And then you would also say that fits you into tier 3. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, and now I'm going to turn it over to Jerry Gardner, who's going to talk a little bit more in detail about the population certification form and the fillable PDF.
Thanks, Virginia. So as Virginia indicated, we're going to look at the population certification itself, and Esther's pulled it up here, so you can actually see it's in Appendix C in the RFP, and it's also, there's a description of it on pages 12 and 13 of the RFP. And as you go through here, you need to be checking off the name of the tribe, the date of certification, the applicant type. You've got the tiers listed here. You've got some descriptions there. And then on the second page is the chart that really shows where you're showing what your numbers are and what the basis is for it. So you'd be putting the tribal name, the population figure, if you're using a population figure, the population tier, and then you're also indicating the basis for it. And so this is the crucial part here, is making sure that you've indicated population and or population tier and the basis. So with the question like on the IHS numbers and like that, you would be indicating that here as the basis if that's what you're using. And then Esther, if you could scroll down to the bottom, to the next page actually is the certification itself is on the third page, and as you go down on the certification towards the bottom, the name of certifying official, and name of the certifying official would generally be the person who is submitting who's submitting the form, who's submitting the pre-application, their title, their official email, and the like, that you don't necessarily have to put here. You wouldn't be necessarily putting here the enrollment office person or someone else. It's basically the information for the person who is submitting the pre-application on behalf of the tribe. Breck, did you want to add anything to that?
No, Jerry, thank you. I think you covered it. I think there has been some confusion about who the certifying official is. For DOJ purposes, the person certifying is the person who is submitting the pre-application. And of course, you all will have internal processes and procedures and approvals that you may need to go through in order to have the designation to be able to certify for the tribe. But for our purposes, it would just be the person who's submitting. And I think the one other thing I just want to make sure we cover, because I know it may not be clear in this current solicitation. Jerry, were you going to speak to what the tribes would do if they are not going to be able to provide an actual population at this time?
It'd be great if you could cover that now. Thank you.
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to. So one thing I think that we may get to a little later, or I can't recall, I'm trying to remember the sequence of the slides, but one of the flexibilities that OVC is offering right now, understanding that in the current circumstances, it may be difficult for folks to get their own internal approvals to submit a certification number on behalf of a tribe. If it's not possible, I mean, ideally, we are hoping you can do it because it will be very helpful for us to ensure that the funds are equitably distributed across the tiers that we're providing. But if you are unable to actually provide either a tier or a population number, an alternative option for you as an applicant would be to complete the first page of the population certification form, and where it says date of certification, you would just put something along the lines of decline to certify. And if you decline to certify, what will happen is that your application, assuming that you are an eligible applicant, your application will automatically go into Tier 1, which is the lowest tier, and you will receive the same award amount as the other applicants who are in Tier 1. So we want you to be sure that you understand that that is an option for you. And it's actually important that you still upload the form because our grants management system is a little clunky, and it expects that all applications will have at least 2 forms uploaded into it. So if you don't upload a population certification form, it may give you some problems. But again, if you, for whatever reason, cannot certify a population number or a population tier, you have the option to decline to certify and be placed in Tier 1. And again, there is a lot more information in the revised solicitation about that option.
Thanks, Breck. Esther, then can we go on to the next slide? So here's just the screenshot of the population certification. And then here's just further explanations. Breck was just describing that if you don't provide either population number or applicable population tier, then you'd be placed in Tier 1, which is the lowest population tier, which is 999 and below, and receive a Tier 1 funding allocation. And again, there's more information in the RFP on pages 12 and 13. This is one of the places where there was one of the 2 main places where there were changes over the original RFP and the revised one as of April 16th. Next slide. And again, we've kind of covered these things, but it's again determining population, that OVC will accept the tribe certification as to population number and tier, that it is important that the tribe or applicants applying on behalf of tribe or tribes must briefly explain how they determine the population number in the population certification PDF in that attachment. And in general, OVC suggests using a population number that's well established, such as the tribal resident population, tribal enrollment, or service population. But other ones can be used. Those are just the most common ones. Next slide. If you need assistance with the population certification, OVC's tribal TNTA providers can help. That's Unified Solutions and Fox Valley Technical College. If you are an OVC grantee, you should contact your current OVC TNTA provider. If you're a new applicant, so you're not a current OVC applicant, then there's an email here provided for asking for information. And of course, you could contact us at TLPI or NCAI, and we can help to answer any questions as we go through. So that's the population certification, which is one of the 3 documents that you need to submit to qualify under the pre-application process. So if we go to the next slide, the second one that you need to complete is the Financial Management and System of Controls questionnaire. And this is indicated on pages 12 and 13 of the RFP, and there's a visual of it here. It also tells you where you can download the questionnaire. You have to download it from the OJP website, and it has to be completed by the applicant's chief financial officer or the equivalent. But it's in most cases, most tribes would already have one of these on file, and it should appear. In general, it should appear as you're going through the process. If it doesn't, if you hit refresh, if it should pull up the completed questionnaire, you could then make any needed updates and then resubmit. Jessica or Breck, does anyone want to add to that?
The only thing I would add is you just want to make sure that you have the most recent Adobe Acrobat on your computer to avoid any issues with uploading.
You don't want to have problems with acrobatics. So the Adobe Acrobat. So that's the second. So it's the population certification is the first one. The financial management questionnaire is the second part, and the third part is the SF424. And here there's a number of little quirks along the way in completing this. So it's important as you're completing this to have access to the RFP, especially as we'll get to Appendix D that walks you through the different screens here. As Breck indicated, there's a few different things that because the 424 isn't necessarily designed for pre-application process. So the RFP gives you the specific information you need for this specific one to complete it to get through the process. So the type of application you'd want to indicate is new. You want to indicate exactly the right legal name as used in OJP award documents for the tribe or the organization you're submitting on behalf of. The start and end dates, as you were indicating earlier, you would just put January 1st of 21 to December 31st of 21. But if you forget or put different dates, they can all be revised later. The estimated funding, you need to, it's suggested that you enter $1 just because the system won't take zero. And so, but if you enter something else, that's fine too. And you need to make sure, of course, that you have the proper project description, which is the FY20 or 2020 Tribal Victim Services Set-Aside Formula Program. And then as we've been indicating earlier, for the designees and consortium, that they're generally required to submit the tribal resolutions. Resolution, if it's a designee for a specific tribe, consortium would need tribal resolutions from every tribe that's part of the consortium. And it's preferred that OJP prefers that this be submitted with the pre-application, but in the revised RFP, there's information on what you can do if you are unable to complete it in time, which may be a challenge with a number of tribes and the current COVID-19 challenges. what you would do in lieu of that would be to submit a letter explaining why you've been unable to obtain the tribal resolution in that time period. And the other thing to keep in mind with this is that though OVC has provided the flexibility here, that you don't have to submit the resolutions with the pre-application as long as you explain why you're unable to do so. But you do need to keep in mind that for the full application by June 15th, that you would need to, by that period, you have to have all of the applicable resolutions.
Jerry,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. Somebody wanted to know if a tribe went ahead and got a resolution, should they go ahead and submit that?
I defer to Brett, but I think the answer is yes. If you've got a resolution, go ahead and submit it. That this is just providing added flexibility if you're unable to do it, and so you need to submit either the resolutions themselves or an explanation of why you're unable to submit them. Did I cover that all, Brett?
Yes, that's correct. I think the only thing I would just clarify is, again, the tribal resolution or other legal authority documentation is only required for designees and consortia. So if you are a federally recognized tribe who intends to apply, certainly if you have already gone ahead and gotten a tribal resolution, you could submit it, but it's not required. We're only going to be requiring it by June 15th for the consortia and designees.
Thanks, Brett. And so this next slide just explains, as we've been going through, the process of submitting the application and the reasons why, because GMS is not designed for a two-part funding formula determination, that we have to jump through these extra hoops here to kind of indicate the project period, the estimated funding, and those kinds of issues. But we really encourage that as you're going through this process, you would want to refer to Appendix D, which has detailed screenshots and explanation of each of the steps along the way for the submission of the SF424. Next slide. And then here we're just looking at some of the resources referred to: the OVC website, the solicitation itself. As mentioned, that OVC's had 2 pre-application webinars, and there is the YouTube video or audio of both of those are available, along with, I believe, the transcript for at least the first one is also available. So those are other resources you can look at if you have issues and questions. Next slide. Here again is more assistance available through the National Criminal Justice Reference Service and the GMS support hotline. Those are, if you run into troubles as you're going along the way, and the GMS, of course, especially if you have issues or problems with GMS process itself. Again, it's really important to keep in mind that it's best not to be doing this on the 30th or in the last few hours of the 30th, because there can be problems and challenges as you go along. So the earlier you submit, the less likely there is to be trouble or issues or challenges, and if so, then you'd have the time to address those. The next slide. And here's just contact information for Virginia, Esther, Chia, and myself. And I think at this point we wanted to just shift and handle questions. Chia and Esther, if we have any questions.
Yes, we have a number of questions here. So there's a question that Virginia stated that after the full application is filed, OVC will go through its normal procedure. Normally, the grantor reviews applications for merit compared to other applicants. This isn't going to happen with this formula grant, is it? Isn't the review going to be just to make sure that the budget is reasonable and that no unallowable costs are included?
I'll let you answer that one. Yeah, I think that the questioner is right. I didn't mean to suggest that there'd be kind of a peer review and comparing of applications, but I'll let Breck speak more about that.
Yeah, you're right. That what Virginia just said now is right. There is not going to be a peer review. The applications will be reviewed internally, just looking at budgets, making sure that everything proposed is allowable, is in scope, is non-duplicative. But no, they will not be peer reviewed or subject to any sort of competitive process.
Thanks. The next question is, will we have to take the financial training again? I'm assuming that this person, that the tribe maybe already has an OVC grant, but they didn't clarify.
Yeah. Assuming that you are a current grantee and that you are within the sort of eligible window of when you've taken the training, I have to be honest with you, I can't remember what the period is, but and I can look that up if somebody wants to email me and tell you what it is later. But assuming you are still within the window of not needing to have re-upped your training, then no, you would not need to take it again. Actually, let me just clarify. That is also assuming also that it is the same key personnel, obviously, who have already taken the training. So, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. See, someone said they thought that their chief had to sign the population certification form. Is that not the case? Can our program director who is submitting the actual grant in GMS sign it as the certifying official?
And the short answer to that is yes. Yep. From DOJ's perspective, whoever's submitting in GMS can sign it. They don't need the chief to do it. They don't need the tribal enrollment officer to do it. Now, there's a whole different question about, what are the rules for your tribe? Does your tribe have policies that you need to comply with? But that's not a question that we would be able to answer. There's nothing in the DOJ requirements that would say it needs to be the chief. It can be the person who is the program director who's going to be submitting in GMS.
Thank you. Next question. Our department currently serves a 7-county area, which would include non-native and native people. We have only included the population for our tribe since it specifically asked about the tribal population. Do we need to add the population for each county that we currently serve?
I don't think anybody on this call is going to have a clear answer for you on that. Again, the way that DOJ set it up is for the tribes to determine what's the appropriate population number, and whether that's your tribal enrollment number, or if you, depending on how your victim services program operates, if it feels more appropriate to you to use the 7-county number, that's up to you.
I think an added issue on that before we go from that question is it sounded like the questioner had already submitted it with just the tribal enrollment numbers. And I guess the question to Breck would be, what would be the process for, can they just submit a revised one if they want to go with a different figure than they initially submitted?
Yeah, so to back up and just say, I guess what I would say is, and again, when coming up with your population, keep in mind that, the number needs to be, ideally it's based on existing data, which it sounds like in this case it is, and that it is sort of a reasonable number. So you would want to be taking into account, the proportion potentially of folks you are serving from your own community versus outside your community and all of that, and have appropriate documentation on file so that if anybody ever came and said, hey, how did you come up with your number, you have something to point to. All that to say, as Jerry alluded to, if you do want to potentially revise your number, all you would need to do is basically submit a new application in our grants management system. And what we do on our end as a default is whatever the last application is that you have submitted by the deadline becomes the application of record. So the prior application is essentially thrown out and we would be using your new application.
Great, thanks. The next question, can you use can you use the population native and non-native within the boundaries of the tribe?
I mean, it's the same answer as to the last question, that, what Breck said, that, that each tribe is going to figure out for themselves what methodology to apply, and it needs to be justifiable and reasonable, but it's ultimately up to the tribe.
Thanks, Virginia. If tribes apply as consortia, will the consortia be funded as one tribe or the number of tribes in the consortia?
So I assume that question is about the funding level. And basically the way that the budget allocation for a consortia will be calculated is that it will be aggregated. So that, what I mean by that is if there are 5 tribes in the consortia, DOJ will figure out what the allocation would be for each of those tribes and then add them together, and that's what the consortia gets. Breck, let me pause and make sure I didn't get that wrong.
No, you weren't wrong. The only thing I would add is there is the cap. It is up to a cap of $3 million, and that is both for consortia. That's also for larger tribes. No one applicant, whether it be a consortia or an individual tribe, will get more than $3 million.
Got it. That's a very helpful clarification.
Thank you. The next question. So tribal governments will not need a resolution for the pre-application or the June full application.
Breck, do you want to take that one?
Yes, the answer is yes, that is correct. You will not need, if you are a tribal government applying as a tribal government, you will not need a resolution at any point in the process. If you are a designee of a tribal government or a consortium of tribes, you would need to provide some type of legal documentation by June 15th, and that might either be a tribal resolution. I understand in the case of some consortia, it could be bylaws, but something that shows that you have authority to apply on behalf of the tribe or tribes that you are applying for.
Thank you. The next question. We as a program have always served a 50-mile radius with our tribal population. That would be our population size, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think if that's, again, it's up to the tribe to determine, and if that's what you view to be your service population, that makes sense to me.
Next question. It sounds like funding will be by tier category rather than specifically a per capita allocation. Is this correct?
That's correct. Each tribe within a particular tier will end up with the same allocation.
From the same participant. Following up, is it worth adding a few individuals to our count if it won't make any difference to our actual funding?
Virginia, do you want me to?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, all I was going to point out is, I mean, first of all, I would urge you to, if you have as precise a number as possible. And the one additional thing I would just point out is that we are using those population numbers you provide for sort of the back end math, as Virginia said earlier, on how we allocate funding across the tiers. So I would say yes. I mean, if you have a justification for adding, a couple more people, I mean, whether or not it actually would change your dollar amount is questionable, but it would help us on the back end, making sure that as we distribute the funds across the tiers, that we are accounting for the entire population of a particular tier.
Thank you. It doesn't look like we have any other questions at this point.
Great, thank you, Chia. We do have about 10 minutes left. So we can give it another minute or two to see if any other questions come in. And if not, as we mentioned, so the solicitation is available as a handout. And then this webinar will be available afterwards. So, you can always reach out as well with any follow-up questions with the contact information on the screen.
Sure, we just
got.
Oh, folks, once we're done with the questions, we could show folks the last slides on the allowable and unallowable costs.
We just got one more question. On the 424, is this considered a pre-application or application?
I can answer that one. This is correct. I can answer that one. It's a new application, and I understand this is confusing because one of the options the 424 asks is it a pre-application? And even though we are calling it a pre-application in this solicitation, that's not what you should select in GMS. What you should select is new application. And again, if you go to Appendix D, where there's the guide to submitting pre-application in GMS, there are, as we said earlier, literally screenshots exactly showing you what you're going to see at each part of the GMS process and what you need to select. But you should be selecting new application.
If there aren't any additional questions, we could just go through real quickly the last slides. They relate to the application itself. And so it's just an overview of what are allowable costs in general, and indicates that, salary, fringe, travel, equipment, facility costs, supplies, etc. But the cost must be justified as improving victim services. And as Virginia mentioned before, it's really good to look at Appendix A has detailed information on what is allowed and what isn't allowed. The next slide is what are victim services. And again, here, this just goes through some of it. It's not everything, but it gives you a general sense of what are the kinds of victim services that would be allowed. And again, to see Appendix A for detailed information. And Breck, with this, I'm assuming that that the Appendix A that is included here is the same. That there's been no changes. That's basically the same information of what's allowable and unallowable that folks have been looking at the last 2 years.
Actually, I think there are a couple changes. I don't think it's anything major. I believe our Office of General Counsel went in and added some clarifying language around construction, because that's an area where we often get a lot of questions and there's a lot of confusion. So that particular area, I think, was just the language was updated and hopefully clarified. I can't recall if anything else was clarified, but certainly I would say nothing substantive has changed. It's not like we took anything out or added anything.
Great, thanks. Next slide is, again, what can be funded, needs assessments, strategic planning, program development, program implementation, program expansion. It can be expanding the type of services, the population, the types of crimes addressed. I think some of the OVC proposals in the past have required needs assessment, strategic planning, but this one wouldn't necessarily require you to do that, though it's a suggested way of going through. But all these are kinds of things that can be funded. And the next slide, I think, goes through, again, examples of allowable uses of funds. And then the final slide is unallowable cost. And these are really important, especially if you haven't worked with OVC funding and victims of crime funding before, that there are a number of things that it can't be used for. And things like services for criminal offenders, primary crime prevention activities, costs associated with law enforcement or prosecution personnel or activities, and construction. And the shorthand sometimes over the years has been that you can't fund the 3 Ps, which is prevention, perpetrators, and prosecution. And that's just one quick way of remembering. I think it's really important for those who are familiar with OVW funding, which does allow, for instance, prevention, and that it's really important to keep in mind that the OVC funding has different requirements, and that those different requirements really come from the statutes authorizing the Victims of Crime Act funds. So it's not; these aren't added restrictions that OVC's come up with, but rather it's the statutory limitations of the VOCA fund itself. And one distinction I would make too is just keep in mind that, like with law enforcement and prosecution, that you couldn't fund a general law enforcement or prosecution person, but you could fund a victim services or victim advocate in law enforcement or in prosecution. So there are ways of kind of addressing it, and that's what Appendix A really goes in great detail of the kinds of things that are allowed and not allowed. But I do think it's really important that folks keep in mind that the OVC what can be funded with an OVC grant is different than an OVW grant, and it really is the result of the statutory authority for the specific levels of funding. Did Virginia or Breck, did anyone want to add to that?
We got a couple other questions, if there's nothing else to add. Okay, this is a clarifying question from the 7-county area earlier question. The 7-county area includes 3 other federally recognized tribes. However, we serve tribal members that are not included in those 3 tribes, as well as non-native victims. Including the populations of the counties we serve, is it okay to do without submitting paperwork for a tribal consortium?
So that's not something that DOJ is really going to get into and look at with what they're asking for. I think, I mean, and I know this is difficult. I think a lot of people, the tribes during consultation asked for flexibility on the question of how population is determined, and DOJ responded by giving tribes that flexibility. And then I think the trade-off with flexibility is in some cases a lack of clarity, right? And so now individual tribes are trying to figure out what is the appropriate methodology. And I would just so we don't have solid, clear answers for a question like that one. I would just really encourage people to reflect on what seems reasonable and what seems fair and what accurately captures your population in terms of the victim services that need to be provided. One of the things we haven't talked about yet on this webinar, but that OVC, that was also a big topic of conversation and consultation, and that OVC stressed in their solicitation, is this is an interim formula. This is, OVC made a commitment to try and transition pretty quickly from their usual way of doing business to try and adopt a formula for this year at the urging of the tribes. But I think everybody realized that just given the timing, there wasn't enough time to perfect a formula. So this formula for this year and the way population is being handled is really, kind of an interim formula while the tribes and OVC continue to consult. And I think one of the things that'll be a topic of ongoing consultation is how should there be more guidance on how tribal population is determined, or should it continue to be left up to the tribes? And I think that one of the things that'll factor into that is when tribal allocations are made, if tribes report a population that makes other tribes really raise their eyebrows, right? And say, like, wait a minute, tribe X claimed however many, a much bigger population than than anybody else would have thought was reasonable. I think that'll that'll be something that the tribes, the tribal governments are then talking about and trying to work out through consultation going forward. So for this year, I would just encourage people to really reflect on what seems reasonable, what seems justifiable, what seems fair, and also think about the extent that you diverge from what your tribe is reporting in terms of population, service population for other programs, that you've got a good reason for it, right? I think most of the tribes in the country last week had to submit a bunch of population numbers to the Department of Interior and Department of Treasury for their coronavirus relief funds. And I think there might be good reasons why a tribe would use a different number for victim services purposes. But if you are using a different number for victim services purposes, I think you should, I would just encourage people to really reflect on that and really think about what the justification is, and to try and come up with something that is reasonable and that you would feel comfortable, defending, right? If every tribe approaches this by trying to figure out, what's the biggest number we can come up with, and that will, that'll have a ripple effect and cause problems down the road. But in the victim services space, I think it's, it is very reasonable that many of our tribal victim services programs are serving a high number of non-Indians, or are, have a very high number of non-citizens who are coming through their areas for tourism, for work, for other purposes. So very much recognize that in this space, tribal enrollment is not necessarily the beginning and end of the story. I don't know, Jerry, if you have other things to add on that.
I think you covered it really well. Thanks.
Thanks, Virginia. We just have one more question. Is this replacing any purpose area in CTAS?
That would be a correct. Yes.
Yep. I figured you were going to. So the answer is yes. So traditionally, the Tribal Victim Services set-aside funding had been issued through Purpose Area 7 in CTAS. If you look at the most recent 2020 CTAS solicitation, it specifically said that there was no Purpose Area 7, and that it was in fact going to be a separate solicitation for the tribal set-aside. So what we're talking about today is that separate solicitation.
There's a follow-up question here. Will this solicitation continue to be released each year, or will this be the only grant solicitation for the next 5 years? And should we build in all current salaries and services at the funding from CTAS, OVC, VSSA 2018, VSSA 2019 grants, and end in 2020, 2021, and 2022?
So I guess what oh, sorry, go ahead. Please, Virginia.
No, you can go ahead. I expect we're about to say the same thing, so go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is that the extent to which this solicitation will be available in future years will be contingent upon congressional appropriations, as is all of the Office of Justice Programs funding, assuming that Congress does continue to appropriate funding to the set-aside in future years. As Virginia said earlier, I think we are planning on continuing to improve the formula and move forward in this direction. So in regards to, all that to say, so if there were future congressional appropriations, I would anticipate that there would be future solicitations. In regards to the second part of the question, I'm not entirely sure I understood what was being asked, but I would say that if you are intending to apply to this particular solicitation, you really should be thinking about what you will be doing with this funding. So you wouldn't necessarily, certainly if you have other OVC grants or other OVW grants, you should take into account what you're doing under those grants and ensure that there's no duplication. But all we would be asking for as part of this solicitation is what are you planning for activities using this particular funding that we are allotting this year. I don't know, Virginia, did you have more to add to that? Because I got slightly confused by the second part of that question.
Yeah, no, I was more also focused on the first part of the question, but I do think, since Brex and I wear different hats, she works for the federal government and I don't, what Congress is going to do is obviously never 100% predictable, but we do expect more funding to come for this program. And then I think it really comes down to a strategic decision on behalf of the applicant about how much do you want to count on that versus how much do you want to build the budget from this first allocation to cover all of those things that are, for your grants that'll be expiring. it's a little bit tricky. I think ideally down the road, if we knew that this formula funding was going to flow year after year after year, and we got used to what the funding level was going to be for each tribe, you could kind of envision, having a tribal strategic plan where you could build out more robust services over time as your funding grew. And so you may want to think about that now too. But the conservative thing would be to take the first year's worth of money, meaning that the money that you would get through this solicitation, and make sure you had your basic services covered for whatever time period you're worried about. That may have been more confusing than helpful, but I think these are some kind of tough questions that are good problems to have, that we've got this new funding stream, but trying to figure out how to make it work and how to plan for program stability over time is still a bit of a challenge, since the funding is coming 1 year at a time right now.
And this, Jerry, I would just add too, is just keep in mind, and I believe that when you do the full application, you'll have a choice of how long of a period your grant period would be and your funding would be used of. So, and I believe it can be as short as a year, and it can be as long as 5 years. But that's and so you can make strategic decisions around that. If you need all of it for 1 year, you could take the chance, perhaps, of doing it that way and figuring for the next go round you would do the next year or something. Or you can add additional staff. You can fund a base level through 1 year's award here, and then add on to other staff, in later years with the additional funding or something. But it is important, I think, to keep in mind your longer term plans as part of it, and certainly our hope is that there will continue to be this kind of funding, and it'll continue to be every year as through a funding formula going forward.
The other thing I just wanted to stress too is OVC has some great technical assistance available, and so I would encourage tribes to engage with technical assistance providers around these kinds of questions. Whoever your existing TA provider is, they'll be more familiar with your program and can help you think through the options and come up with a plan that works.
We don't have any other questions at this point.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much to all of our presenters. Thank you so much, Tia, for navigating the Q&A, and thank you all for joining us today. Stay healthy, and as we mentioned, this webinar will be available afterwards. So thank you so much. Bye.